Under the dying light of a crimson sun, the silver wheat fields of Drexler 4 swayed in uneasy rhythm, rattling under the pressure of distant engines. Ravik's hands moved automatically, guiding the old harvester along the final row, his thoughts half drifting to the meal he'd cook later. Then the sound came, sharp, metallic, a shriek that cut the evening in half. The air trembled as shadows fell across the field. Above him, the silhouettes of Auroch, mere hunting ships, tore through the clouds, their underbellies splitting open like the jaws of predators. From them nightmares descended, six-legged beasts with skin the color of forged steel and eyes like molten glass. They hit the ground with enough force to send tremors up Ravik's legs. One creature landed barely 20 meters away, its bulk dwarfing the harvester. It pivoted sharply, focusing on movement at the far end of the field, a boy no older than 10 standing frozen with a pail of water. "Run!" Ravik shouted, but the word barely left his mouth before the beast surged forward. Fence posts exploded as it passed, and in the blur of motion Ravik saw the boy's eyes, wide, confused, reflecting the beast's glinting fangs. Then the child was gone, swallowed whole in a convulsive snap of the creature's jaws. Ravik's legs moved before his mind caught up, boots digging into the soil as he sprinted. The reek of hot metal and blood filled his nose. A low growl rolled through the air, vibrating in his chest. He closed the distance, swinging his harvesting hook at the beast's flank, but it turned with frightening speed, batting him aside like a rag doll. He hit the ground hard, the wind leaving his lungs. The earth shook again, not from the beast this time, but from an explosion behind them. The shockwave ripped across the field, scattering wheat and debris. A burning pressure rose beneath the soil. Ravik barely had time to register the deep, cracking sound before the ground opened under him. He fell, tumbling through dirt and rock, his body smashing into the remnants of something buried for centuries. The fall ended in darkness. For a moment all he could hear was his own heartbeat. Then light. A cold, steady glow cut through the dust emanating from a massive black object lodged in the cavern wall. It was metal, but unlike any alloy he knew, its surface shimmering with a faint blue pulse. He dragged himself closer, compelled by an instinct he didn't understand. The shape was vaguely like a core, but alive somehow, each pulse timed to the rhythm of something breathing. He reached out. The moment his fingers brushed it, lightning slammed into his spine. His body convulsed, every nerve screaming as energy surged through him. He gasped, but found no air, and his senses snapped open. The world didn't go quiet. It slowed. Sound became a drawn-out hum, like echoes underwater. Dust motes drifted lazily in front of his eyes. His own heartbeat thundered in his ears, each beat separated by impossible spans of silence. His vision sharpened until he could count the jagged edges on the cavern walls. A flicker of movement pulled his gaze upward. The beast had followed him into the hole, squeezing its massive body through the ruptured earth. Its jaws gaped, strings of blood still dripping from its last kill. The droplets fell in slow arcs, refracting the blue light of the core. Ravik's hand closed around the wooden shaft of his harvesting hook, but now the weight felt negligible, the grain of the wood detailed under his fingertips. The beast lunged. He moved without thinking, a blur of muscle and intent. His body seemed to know the path before his mind did, shifting aside by inches, letting the creature's momentum carry it past him. The sound of its claws scraping stone echoed like a drumbeat. In one fluid motion, he brought the hook around. The blade met flesh and steel like hide with no resistance, slicing through as if the creature were made of wet paper. Time snapped back into place. The beast hit the ground in two halves, the metallic stench of its blood flooding the air. Ravik stood over it, chest rising and falling, the blue pulse from the core now faintly mirrored in his own veins. Above, the hunt ship still roared, and in the distance more shapes fell from the sky. He tightened his grip on the hook. Whatever had just happened to him, it wasn't done yet. This was only the beginning. The morning after the attack was unnervingly still, the kind of silence that felt less like peace and more like the breath held before another blow. Smoke still curled from the far edge of the wheat fields where the Auroch mere hunting ships had descended, their metallic scent lingering in the air. Ravik moved slowly across the churned earth, boots sinking into the soft ground as he carried the wrapped body of the boy. The sheet was rough and thin, barely disguising the small shape inside. They buried him near the northern ridge where the soil was firm and dry, far enough from the settlement that the scavenger beasts wouldn't disturb it. A few villagers stood in a small cluster, heads bowed, eyes hollow. No one spoke until the last shovelful of dirt was patted into place. Then the oldest among them, a weathered man named Howrick, looked up. "If no one stands up," he said, his voice cracking like old wood, "we'll all die like weeds. trampled without notice. Ravik didn't answer. His gaze drifted to the horizon where the scorched line of the attack still smoked. He'd heard words like that before, on other worlds, from other mouths, right before they were silenced forever. Ravik had been a soldier once, long before the fields and the quiet. Leader of Shadowlance, a strike team feared across the frontier for their precision and their ruthlessness. They had worked jobs no one else would take, extracting hostages from warlords, sabotaging fortress ships in deep space, assassinating targets so well protected that entire fleets had failed. The pay was good, the danger constant. Then came the day it all ended. They had been sent to secure a forward post from Orakmir forces. The plan was simple: infiltrate, disable comms, hold until reinforcements arrived. But halfway through the operation, the enemy knew they were coming. The outpost became a slaughterhouse. One by one, his people fell. Arlen cut down in the corridor, Mira blown apart by a plasma mine, Tovik burning alive in a sealed bulkhead. Ravik had fought until his legs gave way, until the pain in his back from the shrapnel felt like fire eating his spine. When he woke up, he was the only one left. The reports later confirmed what he already suspected. Their commander had sold their location to Orakmir in exchange for a promotion. The scar from that day ran in a jagged line down his back, but the deeper wound was invisible. He left the life behind, vanished into the ragged reaches of the frontier, and found Drexel IV a world no one cared about. A place to disappear. He worked the fields because the repetition kept his mind quiet. He spoke little, kept to himself, but he still lent a hand when needed, repairing fences, pulling carts from mud, carrying the injured when the rare storm rolled in. There was still, buried under the ice of his composure, a fragile belief that protecting the innocent meant something. But it was a belief that never reached his eyes. Now, with the smoke still hanging in the air, that belief was being tested again. He walked back from the grave with Halric trailing behind. "You fought them last night," Halleck said carefully. "Not many would have tried. That means something." Ravik's tone was flat. "It means nothing. The boy is still dead." Halleck stopped, voice hardening. "You have something now. I saw it in the way you moved. We've all heard the stories of old tech buried under this land. Maybe you found it." Ravik didn't reply. He didn't need to. Halrick's eyes already told him he was right. Later, alone in the barn, Ravik turned the moment over in his mind. The light from the buried artifact had burned itself into his memory, its pulse somehow now matched to his own heartbeat. He reached for a rifle resting against the wall, an old bolt-action kept more for show than use. Pulling a single round from the belt, he chambered it, the click sharp in the quiet. He crossed the barn and stood 10 paces from a wooden post. Without ceremony, he lifted the weapon, aimed high, and squeezed the trigger. The muzzle flash bloomed, and before the sound could fully reach his ears, his other hand shot forward. His fingers closed around something hot and metallic in midair. When he looked down, the brass casing sat warm against his palm. The shot still rang in the rafters. He hadn't thought, hadn't calculated. It had just happened. He repeated the test, faster this time, firing from the hip. Again, the world slowed. The bullet's path was a bright, lazy line in his vision. He reached out, plucked it from the air like a drifting feather. His breath came steady, his pulse calm, but his mind churned. This wasn't just speed. This was prediction, knowing exactly where the bullet would be before it got there. He turned the round in his fingers, watching the dull shine of it catch the lamplight. In the past, this kind of precision had taken years of drills, countless hours of reflex training. Now, it felt instinctive, dangerous, the kind of edge that could end a fight before it began. The barn door creaked open, and a young woman from the village stepped inside, eyes wide. "What are you doing?" she asked. He closed his fist around the casing. "Just checking something." She hesitated, gaze flicking to the rifle, then to his expression. "You're different now. You could help us." Ravik's jaw tightened. "Help gets people killed. I'm done with that." She didn't argue, just stepped back into the light outside. He listened to her footsteps fade into the distance. Alone again, he stared at the bullet in his hand, feeling the weight of what he'd just done. The speed, the certainty. It was more than he'd ever had before. More than any soldier could dream of, and he knew exactly what that meant. This was the power of a perfect killer, and whether he wanted it or not, it was his now. The storm had rolled in during the night, the kind that rattled the old tin roof of the barn and sent dust curling in. Lazy spirals across the floor. By dawn, the air hung heavy with damp earth and the faint metallic tang of the buried. Artifact still pulsing in Ravik's veins. He hadn't slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the blue light, felt the jolt in his spine, heard the impossible stillness of the slowed world. He needed answers. The hole where he'd first touched the device yawned open at the far end of the field, a jagged wound in the soil. Without telling anyone, he grabbed a lantern, slung his rifle over his shoulder, and lowered himself back down. The descent was steep, the wall slick with a thin layer of condensation. The deeper he went, the less the light from above reached him, until only the glow of the lantern and the faint blue shimmer from the path ahead lit the way. The tunnel was narrow at first, then widened abruptly into a vast chamber. The air here was colder, heavy with the smell of rust and something older, like dried blood on iron. Ravik raised the lantern, and the sight made his stomach tighten. They were bodies, dozens of them, sprawled where they had fallen centuries ago. Humanoid, but not human. Their armor was unlike anything he'd seen. Plates of blackened alloy fused into strange, almost organic shapes. Many were shattered, their edges warped and torn as if something had ripped through them with impossible force. Faint traces of the same blue light glimmered along cracks in the armor, pulsing weakly like dying embers. Ravik stepped closer to one, brushing dust from the chest plate. The insignia was alien yet deliberate, a sigil of intertwined blades encircling a single eye. On the far wall, partly hidden by debris, a set of deep carvings caught his attention. He cleared the dust away and ran his fingers over the grooves. The language was unfamiliar, but the artifact inside him seemed to whisper meaning directly into his thoughts. The one who carries the core will carry war. The words slithered to his mind like smoke, leaving a bitter taste. He stepped back, the weight of the message pressing into him. Memories bled in unbidden, his unit in Shadowlands moving through corridors slick with enemy blood, the tight, professional calm before a kill, the unspoken knowledge that they were tools, nothing more. And then the betrayal, the commander's cold eyes as the trap closed. He had sworn never to be anyone's weapon again. Yet here he was, standing over the corpses of those who had carried the same power, feeling its pulse in his own flesh. The lantern flickered. Ravik froze. The silence of the cavern was broken by something else, something inside his own head. A voice, smooth and deliberate, resonating deep in his skull. "You wonder what I am." His grip tightened on the lantern's handle. "You're in my head," he muttered, his voice echoing off the walls. "What are you?" "I am what'll keep you alive," the voice said, its tone neither male nor female, just a constant, resonant presence. "But survival comes with a price. You must let me hunt. I'm not your tool." Ravik shot back, anger cutting through his unease. "You already are," the voice replied without malice. "Every move you make now, every breath you take, carries my mark. Without me, you would be meat in the jaws of the predators you faced. You've tasted the edge I give you. You know its worth." Ravik turned from the wall, pacing through the rows of fallen warriors. What happened to them? Did they think they were in control too? They fought until they could not. The core does not choose the war. It only ensures its bearer survives it. He stopped, staring at a warrior slumped against the wall, helmet still intact. A crack in the visor revealed a sliver of pale, mummified skin beneath. "And when the war is over," the voice hesitated for a heartbeat, "there is always another war." The weight of those words pressed on him harder than the stone above. His fingers brushed the scar on his back, tracing the path of shrapnel that had nearly killed him years ago. He remembered the screams of his squad, the betrayal, the helpless rage. If he let this thing use him, if he surrendered to it, was he condemning himself to repeat the same cycle? Or was he already in it? He crouched beside one of the bodies, prying loose a weapon half buried in dust. It was a blade fused with metal and bone, light enough to wield one-handed but sharp enough to cut air. When he gripped it, the blue veins along its hilt flared in sync with the pulse in his own skin. The connection was undeniable. "You can't choose the battlefield," the voice murmured, "but you can choose the side." Ravik clenched his jaw, sliding the weapon into the sheath on his back. "Then I choose mine, and it's not yours." "You'll change your mind," the voice said, almost amused. "The predators are coming. You will beg for the hunt." A distant sound interrupted the conversation, a low, rolling growl that made the stone under his boots vibrate. Ravik stiffened, turning toward the tunnel. The growl rose, multiplied, became a chorus. It was deeper than the snarls from the night before, more resonant, each note laced with a promise of violence. He could hear claws scraping rock, the wet rasp of breath, the unhurried confidence of creatures who knew they were apex killers. He reached for his rifle, fingers curling around the grip. The blue light in his veins brightened, quickening his pulse. The voice in his head was silent now, but its presence lingered, like a predator crouched just behind his thoughts. The growls were closer, accompanied by the heavy thud of multiple bodies moving in sync. He pictured the beasts from last night, their speed, their armor-like hide, and then imagined them twice that size, twice that strong. He took a slow breath, centering himself. Running would be pointless. Whatever they were, They were already tracking him, already confident they had him cornered. He could retreat up the tunnel, try to lead them into the open, but the settlement was in that direction. The thought of the villagers, of more graves like the boys, made something in his chest lock into place. The air in the tunnel shifted with their approach, warmer now, tainted with the acrid scent of predator musk. Ravik's grip tightened until his knuckles whitened. The voice returned, a low murmur, almost lost in the rising sound of the hunt. "Now you see, there is no choice but to fight." He didn't answer. The decision was already made. His body lowered into a stance born from years of combat, eyes locked on the tunnel's dark mouth. Somewhere in that blackness the first pair of glowing eyes appeared, followed by another and another. Ravik's breath slowed. The world sharpened. The blue pulse in his veins matched the rhythm of the approaching footfalls. Trapped or not, he was ready. There was no running left in him. The market at night was never quiet, even on a frontier world like Drexer 4. Oil lamps swayed in the humid breeze, casting long shadows across rows of makeshift stalls. The air was thick with the smell of roasted meat, ozone from scavenged power cells, and the murmur of haggling voices. Ravik kept to the edges, hood drawn low, scanning faces without seeming to. Since the incident in the tunnels, he hadn't set foot near the settlement. But word had spread. People noticed the way he moved now, the way his eyes tracked faster than anyone should. He'd come only for supplies, intending to slip in and out before anyone thought to stop him. The voice in his head was silent, but its presence was there, like the hum of power lines before a storm. He was halfway past a row of stalls selling scrap metal when it happened. The first sign was the flicker of the lamps, as if the night had suddenly inhaled. Then came the sound-heavy boots hitting stone in perfect unison. From the far entrance of the market a squad emerged, their armor matte black, shapes bristling with ridges and plates that moved like muscle under skin. The helmets were sleek, with a visor strip that glowed the same molten amber he'd seen in the Predators. Mkuyen. Black hounds. Not rumor, not hearsay, real. Soldiers engineered with Predator DNA spliced into their genes, built for speed, strength, and hunting instincts. Ravik felt his pulse slow, the world sharpening into angles and vectors. He counted 8, maybe 10, each armed with shock spears and retractable claw blades. They fanned out with inhuman precision, herding the crowd inward, cutting off escape routes without a word. The voice whispered, almost pleased, "They've come for you! Let me hunt!" Ravik ignored it and moved. One of the hounds lunged, spear tip flaring blue. He sidestepped, the motion leaving a blur of his outline hanging in the air, and slammed the attacker into a steel support beam. The metal rang like a gong. The crowd broke into panic, scattering in every direction. But the hounds were already moving to contain them. He grabbed a length of loose electrical cabling from a stall wall, yanking it free. Sparks spat into the air. The next attacker came from the side, claws swiping for his ribs, but Ravik ducked low, wrapping the cable around the soldier's arm and wrenching hard. The sudden jolt from the live wire arced through the hybrid's body, convulsing it until it collapsed. He didn't wait to watch it drop. Another was coming straight at him, shock spear stabbing forward in a thrust meant to impale. Ravik pivoted, catching the spear's shaft under his arm, and shoved upward. The weapon's tip punched into a hanging fuel drum above one of the food stalls. The pressurized container hissed violently as vapor spilled into the air. Ravik hooked a boot under the stall's lantern stand and kicked it upward. The flame kissed the vapor, and the resulting blast tore through 3 of the hounds at once, hurling them back into a row of crates. The voice surged with excitement. "Yes! Kill them! Don't stop until none are breathing." "No," Ravik muttered under his breath, spotting movement in the chaos. 2 of the hounds weren't attacking him at all. They were herding civilians into a corner. Their movements were wrong, less precise. As he closed the distance, he saw why. Under the black armor, the faces were human, terrified, their eyes darting behind the visors, collars at their throats pulsed with a sickly red light control devices. These weren't volunteers. They were captives forced to fight. One raised their claws, trembling. Ravik disarmed them with a twist, slamming the flat of his blade into the control collar. The device sparked and went dark. "Go!" he barked. The young man inside the armor stumbled back, then fled into the crowd. The second hesitated, glancing at the other hounds, but Ravik's glare left no room for doubt. He disabled that collar too, and the soldier ran. The voice hissed like a drawn blade. "Mistake. Mercy is weakness. They'll come for you again." "They're not my enemy," Ravik growled, already turning as the rest of the squad regrouped. The survivors spread out, forming a loose circle around him, the nearest charged claws flashing in the lamplight. Ravik stepped into the strike, grabbing the attacker's wrist and using its momentum to throw it bodily into another. Armor clanged on armor, and both went down in a heap. A shadow loomed at his back. He spun, catching a spear shaft with both hands and twisting until it snapped with a sharp crack. The broken end became a weapon in his grip, stabbing into the joint of a hound's armor where metal met flesh. The hybrid screamed, a guttural animal sound, before collapsing. But they were learning. Two flanked him while another came in from the front. One slashed high, forcing him back, while the other swept low to take his legs. Ravik leapt, tucking into a roll that carried him over a stall counter. His landing knocked over a rack of hanging meat, the heavy hooks swinging like pendulums. He kicked the counter hard, sending the hooks into the path of the pursuing hound. The steel pierced armor and flesh alike, dropping it instantly. The last three came at once. He felt the edge of fatigue clawing at his focus, each movement costing a fraction more than the one before. The voice pressed in, urging him to let it take over completely. End them. Now. Now, he gritted, catching the first attacker's claw between his palms and wrenching it sideways until bone snapped. The second swung a spear. He ducked and drove a knee into its gut, then hurled it into the third. They crashed to a stack of oil barrels, the liquid spreading in a dark pool across the ground. A small sound cut through the dinner cry. Ravik's head snapped toward it. A girl, maybe 16, trapped against a stall wall as one of the wounded hounds rose behind her, claws ready to tear. He didn't think. The world slowed again, the blue light in his veins surging until it painted everything in cold clarity. He crossed the space between them in less than a heartbeat, putting himself between the claws and the girl. The impact was brutal. The claws raked deep across his sides, slicing through leather and into flesh. Pain flared white-hot, but he twisted with it, driving the broken spear shaft into the hybrid's neck. It collapsed instantly, dead before it hit the ground. Ravik staggered, the girl clutching at his arm. "You're bleeding," she started, but then stopped, eyes wide. His blood had splattered across the fallen hound's exposed skin. Where it touched, the flesh smoked, then blistered, then blackened as if burned by acid. He pulled back, staring at the sizzling wounds his blood had left behind. The voice purred in his mind, darkly satisfied. "Ah, now you see what else you carry." He didn't answer. The surviving hounds were retreating, dragging their wounded away, the amber glow of their visors fading into the shadows beyond the market. Civilians emerged slowly from hiding, their eyes on him, not with the wary curiosity of before, but with something heavier, fear mixed with awe. Ravik straightened, ignoring the throbbing in his side, and met their gazes. Whatever this was growing inside him, it was more than speed, more than reflex. It was a weapon no one else could wield, and whether he liked it or not, it was only getting stronger. The first tremors reached the edge of the settlement just after sunset, a deep, rhythmic pounding that rattled the lantern poles and made the loose tin on the rooftops hum. Ravik was on the south wall when he saw the first of the pack crest, the rise, sleek, four-legged predators bred for speed, their hides plated in scales that caught the light like molten glass. Behind them came heavier shapes, larger than any hunting beasts he'd faced before. Their howling above the rest was the Hydra. It was unlike anything he'd imagined. 3 serpentine necks rose from a trunk of muscle and armored plates, each head encased in a black helm bristling with neural ports and control rods. One head dripped streams of viscous green fluid that hissed where it touched the ground. Another's maw glowed orange from the heat building inside. The third vibrated with a low hum, distorting the air as if reality itself warped around it. Chains of fiber steel led from the Hydra's collars into the harness of a command skiff crawling in its wake, where Urak Meyer handlers rode with a detachment of people who knew they were in control. A comm unit on Ravik's belt chirped. He tore it free and brought it to his ear, eyes still locked on the Hydra. The voice was deep, cultured, and smug. "Ravik Arden, at last we speak. Who is this? I am Commander Sorin of the Oracmere. I control the beasts outside your walls, including the Hydra. I offer you this. Join my huntsmen, and all of this ends. You will have command over your own pack, wealth beyond this dust rock, and—" the voice paused deliberately. "The location of the man who betrayed your shadow lance." The name, unspoken but clear, hit Ravik like a blow. His grip on the comm tightened until the casing creaked. "You know where he is?" "Alive," Soren said smoothly. "And within your reach. All you have to do is step aside now. Let the Hydra cleanse this place, and you and I will make the galaxy remember your name." For a moment, Ravik said nothing. The Hydra's 3 heads swayed in eerie unison as the pack spread out, tightening the noose around the settlement. Below the wall, people ran with what they could carry, children crying as their parents herded them toward the shelters. He could end it, just walk away. No more responsibility, no more villagers' blood on his hands. and the chance to finally put a bullet in the man who'd sold his unit to their deaths. The voice inside his head stirred. Take it. This is the war you were made for. But another sound cut through the sharp, terrified bark of a dog somewhere in the streets below, followed by a woman's desperate cry for someone to help her. Ravik closed his eyes for a single breath. Then he spoke into the calm, each word deliberate. Tell you, Hydra, I'm coming for it. He tossed the unit aside before Soren could answer. The pulse in his veins flared blue, sharpening the world into lines of attack and escape. The pack was almost at the gates when he dropped down from the wall, rolling as the first predator lunged. His hook blade flashed, severing a tendon at the back of its leg. It crashed sideways into another, tangling them both. The Hydra's first head opened wide, and a ball of white-orange fire roared forth, bathing the street in heat that blistered paint and warped steel. Ravik dove through a narrow doorway as the fire swept past, rolling into the shadows. The second head reared back, spewing a fan of corrosive acid that chewed through stone and left smoking craters in the ground. The third lowered and let loose a pulse of sound so powerful it knocked shutters from their hinges and sent glass exploding outward in deadly shards. He couldn't take them head on, not without a plan. Darting between alleys, he scaled a low roof, leaping from beam to beam until he had a clear view of the command skiff. The neural cables leading to the Hydra's collars pulsed faintly, carrying signals from the control unit. If he could destroy that, a predator spotted him, bounding up the side of the building with impossible agility. Ravik waited until it lunged, then sidestepped, hooking its neck and swinging it into the cables overhead. Sparks flew, and the beast dropped limp at his feet. The damage slowed the Hydra's movements for a heartbeat, enough for him to jump to the next roof and close on the skiff. The handlers saw him coming. One raised a shock lance. Ravik ducked under the swing and drove his blade into the panel. Controlling the Hydra's central collar, a burst of static flared, and the beast roared in all three voices, jerking against its restraints. But it didn't stop. The first head found him, spewing fire across the rooftops. Ravik ran through the blaze, his reflexes turning every step into a calculation, timing the bursts, sliding under collapsing beams, vaulting through curtains of smoke. The acid head lunged next. He dropped into the street, letting the corrosive spray hit the wall above him. Chunks of sizzling stone rained down, forcing the beast back for a moment. He knew he needed something more. The voice in his head whispered eagerly, "Your blood. Give it to the core. Let me guide you." For once, he didn't argue. Ducking into cover, he slashed his palm and let the blood drip onto the tip of his blade. The blue in his veins flared so bright it lit the shadows around him. When he moved again, it was with deadly purpose. He sprinted straight for the Hydra, dodging the sonic pulses and vaulting over snapping jaws. He drove his blade, slick with his own blood, into the joint where the acid head's helm met the collar. The reaction was instant. The flesh hissed, the armor smoked, and the head jerked violently, its roars breaking into static-filled shrieks. The firehead turned on him, flames washing over the cobblestones where he'd been a second before. He slid under its chin and leapt onto the main body, climbing the ridged plates until he reached the sonic head's base. Another slash, another smear of blood, and the beast howled again, buckling under the corrosive effect. It thrashed, slamming into walls, sending debris flying. Ravik held on, driving his blade into the central neural port. Sparks and blood sprayed together as the connection severed. The Hydra staggered, its movements losing precision. The pack scattered without its leader, slipping back into the dark. With a final echoing bellow, the Hydra collapsed, its massive body crushing a section of the street. Ravik rolled clear at the last second, hitting the ground hard. He lay there for a moment, chest heaving, the blue light in his veins flickering. Slowly, he pushed himself to his feet. People were emerging from hiding now, staring at the fallen monster. Some whispered his name. Others just stared at the way his eyes caught the light, no longer their usual grey, but a deep, alien blue that glowed faintly in the dark, the same as the warriors buried in the tunnels. Ravik met no one's gaze as he sheathed his blade. Whatever he'd just done, whatever he'd just become, there was no going back. And somewhere out there, Commander Soren would know exactly what his answer had been. The streets still stank of scorched stone and acid when the last echoes of the Hydra's death faded into the night. Smoke drifted in lazy spirals from collapsed rooftops, and the heat from burned-out buildings radiated against Ravik's skin as he moved through the wreckage. The pack had scattered as soon as their leader fell, disappearing into the hills beyond the settlement's lights. Somewhere in the darkness, he could still hear the faint, high-pitched keening of the handlers retreating with whatever strength they had left. For now, Drexafor was safe, but it would not last. The people began to emerge from hiding faces, pale, clothes singed, eyes wide and uncertain. They stared at him like they didn't know whether to thank him or fear him. He couldn't blame them. He wasn't sure which was more appropriate. His side ached where the Hydra's claws had torn into him, and the skin around the wound was traced with faint blue lines that pulsed in time with his heartbeat. The artifact's influence was stronger now, heavier in his blood, and the voice that had been little more than a whisper before was clear and steady in his mind. You could have ended them all tonight, it said, smooth and certain. You held back. You think mercy will protect them? Ravik ignored it, pushing past the gathering crowd. At the edge of the street, a figure stepped into his path, the girl he'd pulled from the hound's claws at the market. She still had dirt smudged across her cheek, and her hands trembled slightly as she looked up at him. If you become one of them, she said quietly, her voice raw from smoke, I'll be the one to end you. He stopped, meeting her gaze. For a moment, there was only the faint crackle of cooling debris around them. Then the corner of his mouth twitched, not quite a smile. Make sure you're faster than me when the time comes. Her expression didn't change. She nodded once and stepped aside, letting him pass. The voice in his head gave a low, amused hum. She will not be fast enough. Ravik didn't answer it. The truth was, he didn't know. Every time he'd drawn on the power, it had come easier, demanded less thought, as if it was learning him as much as he was learning it. In the tunnels, in the market, against the Hydra, it had been there, sharpening his instincts, guiding his strikes, and now it was no longer content to wait for battle. It was pushing at the edges of his thoughts, pressing images into his mind of future hunts, future kills. As he walked toward the south gate, the weight of the night's destruction settled on him. The burned homes could be rebuilt, the dead buried, but the next attack would come, and the next after that. Mir wouldn't let a weapon like the Hydra's killer go unchallenged. They'd send something worse. And when they did, the settlement would look to him again, whether he wanted them to or not. He passed a group of men repairing a section of the wall, their hammers falling silent as he approached. One of them started to speak, maybe to thank him, maybe to ask for help, but Ravik shook his head and kept walking. Gratitude was a weight he didn't want. Responsibility was heavier still. You could end it for them, the voice pressed. If you took my full strength, there would be no more Orak Maya, no more Pax, no more Hydra, just you and the hunt. That's not my war, Ravik muttered under his breath. It will be, the voice said, with the certainty of something that had seen centuries of battles and always been proven right. The forest loomed ahead, the tree line black against the faint orange glow of the fires still burning behind him. The air was cooler here, the scents of pine and damp earth cutting through the stench of the battlefield. He paused at the edge, looking back once. The people were already moving among the ruins, tending to the wounded, searching for the lost. From this distance, the settlement looked fragile, a cluster of stubborn lights in a sea of darkness. He could stay. He could try to hold the line here, fight every time Orak Mir returned. But he knew what that would mean, using the power again and again until there was nothing left of him but the artifact was shaping him into. And then maybe the girl from the market would have to make good on her promise. Better to leave now, while he still had the choice. He stepped into the forest, the sounds of the settlement fading behind him. The undergrowth muffled his footsteps, and the shadows closed around him like old friends. He didn't have a destination in mind, just the knowledge that somewhere out there, Orak Mir was regrouping, planning, and his old commander was still alive. That part of Soren's offer had not been a lie. The voice seemed to sense his thoughts. We will find him, and when we do, you will not hesitate to dot yes. Maybe, Ravik said. There is no maybe in war. He walked deeper into the dark, each step carrying him further from the lights and voices behind him. He told himself it was temporary, that he'd come back if Drexler 4 truly needed him again. But part of him knew the truth. He wasn't just leaving to protect them from the Orak Mir. He was leaving to protect them from himself. Still, he didn't go without a promise. When the forest path curved and hid the settlement from sight, he stopped and looked back one last time. I'll come back, he said quietly, to no one in particular. If they need me. Then he turned away for good, the blue pulse in his veins lighting his path through the dark. On the frontier worlds, stories had a way of bending into legend. Traders whispered them in dim-lit cantinas, smugglers carried them between ports, and settlers clung to them in the cold nights as if the words alone could ward off the dark. Among these was the tale of the man they called the Lightning Reflex, how he had stood alone against the Orak Mirs, engineered horrors, how he'd cut down the Alpha Hydra and scattered its pack. On some planets they made him a hero, on others a warning. The details shifted with each telling. Sometimes he was a ghost, sometimes half machine, sometimes not even human at all. But the core never changed. He was faster than anything alive, and if you were on his list, you were already dead. Ravik heard these stories sometimes, drifting in from the mouths of people who didn't recognize the quiet man passing through their settlements. He never corrected them. The truth was less clean, less comforting. The Hydra's corpse had long since been scavenged and burned. The pack had not returned to Drexel 4, and Orak Mir had turned its gaze elsewhere. But Ravik's war hadn't ended. Every day since, he'd woken to the steady pulse of the artifact in his veins, the voice that spoke in quiet hours, pressing its will against his own. Every skirmish, every moment of reflex-driven survival felt like a step further down a slope he wasn't sure he could climb back up. The line between using the power and being used by it was thinner than he wanted to admit. He'd learned things in the months that followed, how the power was more than speed, how his blood was a weapon in itself, how his mind could anticipate the flow of a fight before it began. But each lesson carried a cost. Sometimes it was the sleepless nights, replaying the instant where he could have killed and didn't, wondering if mercy had been weakness. Other times it was the flicker in a mirror, or a still pool of water, the brief flash of alien eyes looking back at him. In the quiet moments when the wind was steady and the air carried no scent of predators, he could almost forget. Almost. But the voice was always there, patient and certain. You can't carry this forever. Sooner or later, you will choose the hunt. Maybe it was right. But Ravik had seen what came of letting the power define the fight. He'd walked among the dead than in the tunnels, warriors who had carried this same gift and ended as little more than husks in broken armor. He'd watched the Orak Mire drive captives to kill under its leash, stripping them of choice until nothing human remained. And he'd sworn, quietly and without witnesses, that whatever happened he would not cross that line. When people asked, rarely and always in a lowered voice, why he kept fighting, he told them the same thing. Power isn't for revenge, he'd say, and it isn't for ruling over anyone. It's a reminder that every victory comes with a price. Sometimes that price is your life, sometimes it's your soul. You'd better know which one you're willing to pay before the fight starts. Most nodded, though he could tell they didn't all understand. Some wanted him to be the kind of weapon they could point, the kind that didn't hesitate. But hesitation, he knew, was the only thing keeping him human. He never told them about the moments in battle when the voice grew louder, when it promised him the kill, the clean end, the absolute safety that came with leaving no threats behind. He never told them how tempting it was, how easy it would be to let go and let the artifact do what it wanted. Because that was the trap. It wouldn't feel like losing himself, not at first. It would feel like winning. The galaxy was full of lines like that, invisible until you crossed them. And once you did, there was no going back. So he kept moving, never staying too long in one place, never giving the Orak Mir or the voice too much to work with. Drexel 4 had been a stand he couldn't walk away from, but if he stayed, it would happen again and again, until there was nothing left of him but the legend people whispered about. And maybe that was the real question, the one he never answered out loud. If saving a world meant giving up the last pieces of his humanity, would he do it? Could he step over that line, knowing there was no return? Could anyone? He'd seen men and women break themselves on lesser choices. He'd seen commanders trade whole squads for the illusion of control. He'd seen himself survive when better people hadn't. And he still didn't know if that was because he'd been strong enough, or because he'd been willing to bend in ways they wouldn't. The wind shifted, carrying with it the scent of Drexel 4's silver fields, warm earth, and growing grain. Ravik stood alone on the ridge above them, boots planted in the rough grass, the horizon wide and empty before him. The settlement was just a scatter of lights in the distance, fragile against the dark. Somewhere far off beyond the hills, a sound rolled faintly across the land, a deep, low rumble that might have been thunder, or the distant growl of something moving through the wilds. He didn't reach for his weapon, not yet. The voice in his head was quiet now, content to wait. It didn't need the push. It knew that one day the choice would come again, and when it did, it would be ready to collect its price. For now, Ravik just watched the fields shift in the wind, silver under the dying light. Whatever else the galaxy thought of him, hero, monster, or something between, he knew this, the fight was never really over, not as long as there was something worth protecting. The trick was making sure he could still tell the difference between protecting it and owning it. He turned from the ridge, the last of the sun catching in his eyes, that faint alien blue glinting for an instant before fading back to gray. Somewhere out there, another war was already starting. Somewhere, another line waited to be crossed. And until the day came when Drexel 4 called him back, he would walk the space between them, fighting to make sure that when it did, there would still be a man left to answer.